So with that, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter, Msgr Rossetti.
Thanks, Melinda.
We are handing over controls. Did you get that?
Good. Okay, are we all set?
Yes? I hope everyone can see it. Looks like it.
And they can also see my face as well, I believe.
Yes.
Terrific.
We recently added this new technology, so you guys are all lucky to be able to do that.
Although it's somewhat unfair. They can see me, but I can't see them. Anyway, hello to you all. Well, it's great for you all for being here. I thank you very much for stopping by this webinar. We can talk about priesthood today. I notice that many of you are not priests, but most of you, of course, work in chanceries or parishes or some Catholic organizations. So welcome to these thoughts on priesthood. And also welcome to many of my brothers, priests, who are signed up today. The impetus for this webinar was my latest book on Letters to My Brothers, which you can see the cover of. It just came out from Ave Maria Press about 2 weeks ago. The focus of the book is kind of a informal discussion, like letters between myself and priests. So it's meant to be kind of a person-to-person informal discussion with priests today. And the reason why as I was writing the book, I think things have changed. And the context of ministry has changed, and so I don't think we talk about it much, but the experience of priesthood. For example, when you talk to young priests today, when you ask them what it was like when they told their family and friends they wanted to become a priest, the reaction is a lot different. The old guys, you say, what was it like when you told your family you wanted to become a priest? And they said, well, people were happy, typically. We had a little party, and they were very excited. If you talk to young priests today, they say, well, you know, my father started yelling, my mother started crying, and everyone was pretty upset about it. Things have drastically changed in ministry today. Of course, this is not just for priests, but for all of us. And I think we should look at that and say, since the context has changed, how does that affect ourselves and those of us in ministry today? Because things are very different. The big change I'd like to talk about is what Cardinal Wuerl called in a talk not too long ago, a tsunami of secularism. And I thought it's a great word, the tsunami. It's like this overpowering wave that is really a game changer, and it just changes everything around it. And it's true, it's a tsunami of secularism, and it's sweeping over Western Europe and America certainly, but it's just beginning. And interesting enough, this secularism which is pouring over our countries, we're not at the end of this process. As Benedict XVI said in a letter not too long ago, before he stepped down, he said we are at the beginning of the process, which is a kind of a frightening thought. We are at the beginning of this process of secularism. And just as it has affected Western Europe and the U.S. and Australia and places like that, I think eventually it will affect the entire world. So I think we're the cutting edge of this new church reality. And one of the things that Benedict XVI said was that this tsunami of secularism, one of the effects of it will be that the Catholic Church will no longer be a dominant social force. He said we'll be a much smaller, sort of fervent minority, rather than being such a large social organization as it has been, a large social organization anyway. I don't know if you saw the movie The Golden Compass. I mean, I thought that movie, The Golden Compass, had some real typical secular stereotypes about Catholicism. For example, in The Golden Compass, they had this organization called the Magisterium. And the Magisterium was this sort of dark, oppressive, negative, life-denying organization that was out to squash people's freedom and life. And they came up with these things called dogmas. And of course, it was a not very veiled allusion to the Catholic Church, and it very negative. And I think a lot of stereotypes of Catholicism and religion in general is that way. People think of organized religion as teaching these kind of man-made dogmas that constrict human freedom. They bind the intellect. You can't really be free thinkers anymore. They contradict this science, and they stunt human freedom and growth. And so what people need to do is to throw off this yoke of dogmatic hierarchy in religion. This is a huge change in ministry today, and we should acknowledge it directly. It wasn't that long ago, I think it was the late 1940s and early 50s, when movies like Going My Way and The Bells of St. Mary, Bing Crosby prayed a priest then, very positive about pious movies about the Catholic Church. What you may not remember or know is that these movies were some of the largest grossing movies in real dollars of all time. And they won several Academy Awards, including Best Picture. These movies about the old Catholic Church, this positive view of Catholicism, were smash hits only 60 years ago. And now, could you imagine them having a movie like that? People would laugh. People would laugh. The situation is changing drastically in terms of our environment. I was talking to a couple of young, a vocation director rather. I was in South Island of New Zealand a few years ago, and he was lamenting the fact that two young men in New Zealand wanted to become priests, but the people in their community talked them out of it. And what they said to them was, "You don't want to become a priest. It's a negative life. The church is whatever. And it's a very negative, dour, terrible organization thing to do." And so they decided not to apply. This vision, this modern secular vision of Catholicism, the church is very different. It's a big change. It reminds me of recently, Cardinal Dolan said, a woman came up to him and said, Your Eminence, she was angry at some of the things the church was teaching, and she let him know. And the Cardinal finally said, look, he said, your complaints, not with me. He said, your complaints with Jesus. See, what he was definitely saying was that these things that we teach, these dogmas that we teach, are not made by us. Rather, they are given to us by Jesus and by God. And so the Christian view is very different than the secular view. In the Christian view, the fullness of humanity is found only in Jesus. That we were made for God. That true happiness is only found in God. And that these Catholic dogmas are actually, they're truths revealed by God. And the moral rules that the church espouses and Christianity espouses are not something that we made up. They're coded in the very nature of humanity and creation. And so if you break these rules, it doesn't hurt God per se. It hurts us. We're the ones who are devastated when we break the rules about how we were made. And so chaos and sadness result. The ultimate, really, choice is who's in charge. Secularism puts the human person, man in the men and women sense, at the epitome. The man is the men and women are the ultimate. Not so in Christianity. We say that God is the center of all things. So the question that comes, I think, ultimately is who's in charge. In secularism, it's a man. In Christianity, it is God who is in charge. And it's I think it's a fundamental choice. Will we serve the Lord, or will we serve ourselves? And of course, you remember who made that original choice of not serving God but serving himself, and that was Satan. So I think there is a widening moat between secular society and the church. Before, they were actually, there was a lot of synergy between the two, a lot of symbiosis, a lot of connection between the culture and Christianity and the Catholic Church, and that now is breaking apart. Christianity is no longer being embedded in society, and you see this in many ways. For example, up in Quebec, there was a charter of Quebec values written, put before the National Assembly. I don't think it was going to be passed, but the idea was that it banned every form of eternal religious display by public employees. So if you were a bus driver, a public teacher, whatever, you couldn't wear a cross, you couldn't wear any sort of religious garb or any religious symbols whatsoever. That society is becoming more secular and is expunging religion from its consciousness. And there's two kinds of atheism I talk about. One is explicit atheism, the Christopher Hitchens, the Dawkins of the world, those who say, I am an atheist. But then, and they're still a minority, certainly in the United States, they're still a minority. But there's a growing group, what I call functional atheists. It's not that they are against God so much or against religion. They just don't think about it. It's just not part of their radar screen. And I think that's our biggest challenge, is that people don't think about these things. They don't ask those questions anymore. I mean, I was in Mexico trying to learn Spanish. It didn't take very well. I did my best, but anyway, I was there trying to learn Spanish, and there was a gentleman there who was in his 70s, and a nice man, a good man, and he would go there every summer to learn Spanish. And we had mass every day at the end of classes, which I celebrated in our where we were staying, and he never came. He was Catholic, sort of. And finally, I asked him. I said, being subtle like I am, I said, I noticed you're 75. He said, yes, we talked. We got to be friends. And I said, have you considered what your plan is after you die? And he said, I don't believe in religion. I said, I'm not talking about religion. I'm just simply asking you, have you thought about what's your plan after you die? He said, I don't believe in religion. I said, I didn't say anything about religion at all. I just simply asked you the question, have you thought about what's going to happen to you after you die? Well, the next day he showed up for Mass. I mean, people don't ask those questions anymore. They don't think about God. They don't think about these eternal questions. Where did I come from? Is there a purpose to my life? What's going to happen to me after I die? Is this world completely random? Or is there an intelligent being who loves and creates and guides us? Two completely different worldviews. The way this talk came about, by the way, this book is new. This talk is new. I've been just my recent thoughts. Where this talk came about was a priest was kind of lamenting all this negative press we've been getting, and about the child abuse stuff and all that, whatever. And he finally said to me, when is this all going to end? When is this all going to end? And we all thought about it, and finally someone said, it's not going to end. This is the new normal. And we thought about it, because we keep waiting for it to end. We keep waiting for the press to start writing nice stories about us, I keep waiting for Oprah Winfrey and CNN to say nice things about priests, but they don't. And we keep getting these negatives. Every once in a while I get a nice story, maybe Christmas or Easter, they run a little something about Easter. But generally speaking, throughout the rest of the year, they're just negative stories about priests and the church. And finally said, it's not going to end. And the question is why? Now, this next slide is interesting. This was the O'Reilly show. Whether you like O'Reilly or not, nevertheless, he made a good point on this show. Laura Ingraham was on the show, and O'Reilly said, they're talking about all the negative media coverage, and O'Reilly says it's all abortion driven. He said the American media in general worships at the altar of reproductive rights, and the primary driver against abortion is the Catholic Church, and that's what this is all about. And Ingram said, yes, the scandals were horrific and horrible, and the Catholic Church paid dearly, and victims were victimized. It was a horrific thing. At the same time, I think if all that had never happened, the same people who are criticizing the Catholic Church today would still be criticizing the Catholic Church. And I think that's right. I think there's a fundamental polarity between the secular view of the world and the Catholic religious Christian view of the world, and that the poles are separating, and the choice is becoming more clear, becoming clearer. So now maybe I'm exaggerating, but I think that's clearly the trajectory. I mean, we all see examples to the contrary. So I'm somewhat exaggerating, but not much. But that's clearly the trajectory of where it's going, where the secularism is going in the last 60 years. So I think the question you and I need to ask ourselves, if our context is so different, and it is so different, then this has to change about the way we feel about ourselves, our church, our experience, the whole thing. It changes formation needs. It changes ongoing formation needs. Perhaps it should change the way we as church interact and interact with people, whatever. So we need to start thinking about this. Now, I'm going to give you some ideas about what I initially think might be some conclusions. But you've got your own. I encourage each one of you out there to figure out for yourself what some of the important sequelae results are of this massive shift, this tsunami of secularism. One thing I think it requires of priests and all of us, sisters, religious, deacons, laity, it really requires a personally integrated faith that responds directly to the secular challenges of our time. You know, if there was a time when you could be a priest or someone working for the church and not really be a believer, sort of have kind of a wishy-washy faith, those days are gone because we are constantly challenged in our faith. You know, you go out to any social gathering and someone's going to come at you with a question, a challenge. The church did this, the church did that. I don't believe this, I don't believe that. And so we have to believe it ourselves. I teach seminarians, one of the things I do, and I tell them, you know, you're reading all this theology, which is great, and you've got to do that. But you need to personally integrate it. It has to become part of your life. You have to believe it yourself. For example, people say, Jesus saved us. You know, Jesus redeemed us, saved us. And people today say, for what? I don't need to be saved. You know, I mean, well, say that, and you have to have an answer. When you say Jesus saved us, what does that mean in 2013? We need to know in our own hearts. First of all, we have to believe it ourselves, and we have to articulate it in a way that responds to people's challenges. Otherwise, you can't preach and teach. When we stand up and preach and teach, we can't be just mouthing things we read in the catechism or dogmatic theology book, as good as they are and important they are. We need to say it in the language of the day and in a way which is convincing to others and to ourselves, hence the new evangelization. So do we believe in our hearts and integrate that? And Karl Rahner said this decades ago, but I think it was prophetic. In the days ahead, you and I will either be a mystic, one who has experienced God for real, or nothing at all. And I think that's right. There's no middle ground. There's no place anymore, I think, for wishy-washy Christianity. You've got to be a strong believer because around you is not a lot of support. I marvel at the seminarians we have today. People say, why don't we have some more seminarians? My response is, why do we have the ones we do? Everyone tells them it's a lousy idea. So these guys who come to the seminary today must be internally driven by the Spirit in a very positive way to choose this life, because everything around them is saying no. Now, I'd like to look at some thoughts about this whole question of priestly life today, and I think it'll apply to all of deacons, sisters, laity, whatever. But I did the research on priesthood. I did a survey, you may know, of 2,480 priests a few years ago, 2009, and published in a book by Ave Maria, Why Priests Are Happy. Oh, by the way, the book, Why Priests Are Happy, wide coverage by the Catholic media. But we had absolutely no coverage, not a lick, from the secular media, although we sent lots of flyers out to them, because the book was called Why Priests Are Happy. I sort of jaundicely said, if I had titled the book Why Priests Are Unhappy, I would have gotten coast to coast. I would have been on Oprah. You know, but the notion that priests are happy is so counterintuitive to the secular mindset today. So we'll talk more about that. Anyway, so on this slide you can see that there's a strong correlation between happiness as a priest in my study and their relationship to God. That is, as a priest reported stronger spiritual lives, they also reported being much happier as a priest. Now, this is not a complete surprise, but it's true for all of us. As our faith gets stronger, we become, I think, happier people. That's the stats show it in my study, and every study pretty much shows it. That as religiosity goes up in a healthy way, people become happier people. In fact, a priest who is happy and healthy is necessarily a man of strong faith. Now, the statistics I did both in my study in 2004 and 2009, we see, well, I asked priests if they were happy, and you can see if you add the strongly agree and the agree columns. In 2004, this is only 2 years after the crisis broke in Boston, about 90% said yes. In 2009, it was 92.4. So in my studies, if you ask priests if they're happy as priests overall, the response would be about 90%. Now, it's not 100%. Every one of us knows an unhappy priest. I was giving a talk in one diocese, and a priest was very unhappy with these numbers. Said it's not true. Priests are not happy. This is bunk. And he's just really very unhappy. And the room was full of priests and a few bishops. And I was getting kind of frustrated, and finally I said to him, I said, look, I said, I didn't say it's 100%. I said it was 90%. I said, you could be one of the 10%. So afterwards at the break, the chancellor comes up and bumps me and says, he is one of the 10%. In my study, 90% of priests say that they're happy if you ask them. And in fact, every study that's been done in the last 20 or 30 years has found exactly the same thing. If you ask priests if they're happy, about 90% will say they are. Now, that's a very high statistic. For example, this is the NORC study in 2006. Now, NORC, the National Opinion Resource Center, in 2000, they surveyed 27,000 Americans from all walks of life. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, bankers, plumbers, whatever. And they asked them, were they satisfied with their jobs, happy with their jobs, and did they like their overall happiness with their lives? The group that had the highest level of satisfaction and with life and with their job were clergy, Catholic and Protestant both. And Catholic clergy usually match up very well with Protestant clergy. The happiest group consistently in the United States, when you ask them, are clergy. And I'm sure the sisters' numbers and deacons are also are high too. I know this is counterintuitive because people assume that priests are unhappy. Of course they're unhappy. People say, well, matter of fact, I got called by a producer that wanted to do a TV show. And they knew I was a priest psychologist and I worked at St. Luke's. And so they said, we want to do a TV show on priesthood. I said, fine. I said, what do you want to do it on? He said, we want to look at why priests are unhappy. I said, really? Yeah. He said, we want to talk about why so many priests are unhappy. I said, well, some priests are unhappy. I mean, or depressed, whatever. I said, but that's not been my experience, generally speaking. In fact, we have our share of unhappy or depressed priests. But generally speaking, I don't think priests are any more or less depressed than anybody else. So I think the assumption of your show is flawed. Well, they did not call me back to do the show. But in fact, they never did the show. They just assumed that priests were unhappy and depressed. But actually, if you actually ask priests, and consistently, whoever, the NACPA, no, excuse me, it was NFPC did a study. The Hartford Current did a short little study. The LA Times did one. Kara just published a book. I've got it over here at my shelf. Kara just published a whole study on priestly life. They found exactly the same thing. About 90% of priests are happy. So people don't believe it. I mean, but they just assume that what you read in the media, whatever, is true, that all priests are miserable. And that comes partly, I think, from what they portray, but also the underlying secular assumption that their religion makes you miserable, and in fact that priests being sort of leaders, they must be the high priests of miserableness. And so, but the challenge to the secular mindset, if that's not true, if priests are actually much happier in every survey than the general population, then maybe some of the secular assumptions about religion are wrong. Maybe religion, faith in God, brings some joy and some peace in one's life. As Jesus said, that my joy might be yours, and your joy might be full. My peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Jesus gives us joy and peace, even in the midst of some difficult times. Faith in one's relationship to God needs to be front and center in priestly life today. In this secular environment, we need to have a strong faith. The happiness and health, not to mention the basic survival of our priests today, depend upon it. This is interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with the Reason Rally in Washington, D.C. I just live about 5 blocks from where that was. Just last year, Dawkins, one of the famous atheists, stood up and said this publicly. And you can find it online. Go Google it if you got a moment, and you'll see it. Reason Rally, Richard Dawkins speech, and it's taped, so you can watch the YouTube video of it. Here's what Dawkins said. We just ran a poll by a foundation in Britain in which we took those people who ticked the Christian box in the census. And by the way, that figure has come down dramatically. So as you see the secularization, fewer and fewer people call themselves Christians. We asked them, why did you tick the Christian box? And the most popular answer to that question was, oh, well, I like to think of myself as a good person. But we all like to think of ourselves as good people. Atheists do, Jews do, Muslims do. So when you meet someone who claims to be a Christian, ask him, what do you really believe? And I think you'll find that in many cases, they give you an answer which is no more convincing than that I'd like to be a good person. So when I meet someone who claims to be religious, my first impulse is, I don't believe you. I don't believe you until you tell me what you really believe. For example, if they say they are Catholic, do you really believe that when a priest blesses a wafer, it turns into the body of Christ? Are you seriously telling me that you believe that? Are you seriously saying that wine turns into blood? Mock them, ridicule them in public. Now, this sort of speech, done within the shadow of our nation's capital, would never have been done 50 years ago. I think this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, this tsunami of secularism. People would have been outraged 50 years ago. This is hate speech. And yet, he gets away with it. It's on YouTube. Check it out. It is, and it shows you how times have changed and the need for ourselves to have a strong faith. People must be able to think about and articulate their faith in a way that responds to the challenges of today. I know that many of you today listening are DREs and work in Catholic education. Your job is huge, to help people indeed think about and articulate their faith in a way that responds to the challenges of today. Your job is critical. Secondly, what's also needed today is a masculine spirituality. Now, I'm not speaking about being male. It's got nothing to do with being male, per se. A masculine spirituality is, we all have feminine and masculine kinds of traits, even though we're strictly male or strictly female. So I'll explain what I mean. But a masculine spirituality tends to be more assertive, more evangelical. You see this in Pope Francis' often quoted statement, which people love. We need to go out to the outskirts where there is suffering, bloodshed, blindness that longs for sights, and prisoners enthralled to many evil masters, being shepherds living with the odor of the sheep. So this notion of going out, of being assertive, of preaching the faith, of being there among the people, a kind of masculine spirituality. I'll explain that a little bit more. There is an interesting book by David Murrow called Why Men Hate Going to Church. And this is written by a Protestant fellow, but it applies to Catholicism as well. It's a simple book. It's not really a research book, but it made some good points. The basic point that Murrow made is that we the Catholic, not Catholic, but the Christian faiths in general have emphasized in the last few decades a more kind of feminine kind of traits, loving, caring, forgiving, mercy, all those kinds of things which are very important and very much part of our Christian faith. But we should hold on to those, he said, of course. But there are other kinds of values which have been lost a bit and underemphasized. And those are more kind of what we call masculine traits that men or women can have. An example of this, I did some work using the BEM sexual inventory by Sandra Bem. Sandra Bem was a well-known psychologist who did a lot of work in masculinity and femininity. And Dr. Bem said her thesis was that all of us have some feminine, some masculine traits. Perhaps men have more masculine, women more feminine. I don't know, but that remains to be debated. But the notion was that she thought we should integrate both of those in our lives. I think there's some truth to that. We need to be kind, compassionate, caring, warm, kind of feminine kind of traits. But we also, all of us need to be assertive, stand up for our own beliefs, being able to preach and teach, those kind of masculine kind of traits. Now, I took the BEM sexual inventory and I gave it to a number of priests, and that was some interesting results. The BEM sexual inventory has, and you can find this online easily, it has 20 stereotypical feminine traits: compassion, warm, sensitive, tender, whatever, and 20 stereotypical masculine traits: independent, assertive, forceful, defends own beliefs. And I gave the sexual inventory to a bunch of priests, so 115 priests. And I asked them, which do you think are more desirable? And it turned out that 9 of the top 10 traits chosen by priests as desirable were feminine traits. Only the 10th one was one of her masculine traits, that's have leadership abilities. So it seemed even in my group of priests that they were valuing these important feminine kind of traits, which are very much part of our Catholic faith. But they had less valued these sort of masculine traits. And in many ways, the new evangelization requires both. It requires us to get out there with the odor of the sheep, to be assertive, to defend our beliefs, to speak up, to preach, and to teach. So we need to have an assertive masculine spirituality in addition to our feminine traits in our formation programs in our churches as well. So those of you who teach the faith, you might want to think about that. You know, how do you characterize a Christianity? Is it simply using feminine kind of traits? If so, you might end up turning off a lot of men, according to David Murrow. Or are you teaching both? I remember working in a rectory once, and a woman got mad at me. She says, "Oh," the father said, "you're supposed to be nice." Well, at the moment, I didn't need to be nice because someone was abusing our housekeeper, and I told the person to stop it. Well, Jesus wasn't always nice. Now, he was compassionate and caring, but sometimes he threw the money changers out of the temple and with a whip of cords. There is a time for us to be strong, and I think this is the time. So, some of those masculine traits that relate to the new evangelization: defending our beliefs, taking risks, being assertive, being leaders. We all need to be leaders today, to act as a leader, to be willing to take a stand, even when it's unpopular. And Christianity and Catholicism are becoming unpopular today. Number 3, so what else do we need today? By the way, you might think about it in your own life. In your own life, where are you with those masculine traits and those feminine traits? And if you find yourself light on one side or the other, you can strengthen those. If you find yourself light on compassion, caring, warmth, then you can work on those. If you find yourself light on the masculine traits, then you can work on being strong and being assertive. You can do that. So what else does our secular environment require us? A strong faith, a strong spirituality, and a strong personal support network. The environment around us, we cannot rely upon it to take care of us, because in many times it will be negative. So there's a wonderful description of the priest, but I think all of us in ministry, by John Paul II, Pastores Dabba Vobis. He says, of special importance is the capacity to relate to others. This is truly fundamental for a person who's called to be responsible for a community and to be a man or woman of communion. So this priest is a man of communion, and all of us are men and women of communion. And so part of what it means to be who we are in the Catholic faith, in the Christian faith, is to build communion, to build relationships. We need those relationships. We cannot be isolated people. That the environment is not supportive enough. We need to build a network of friends. So I would say that to anyone who works in formation. Build a network of friends. If you work in RCIA, for example, part of RCIA builds this network of relationships in your group. And one of the problems with RCIA is when it finishes, the people sometimes miss that group. So can we substitute that with another group? I mean, people need groups. They need communion. They need friends. They need support. That's why we have churches, for example, among other reasons. But it is a community of believers. Interestingly enough, Cardinal Dolan told this story the other day. He said, I love the guy. He's Cardinal Dolan's a wonderful man. He said, he's talking to some woman about the faith. And she says, I pray on my own. She says, I don't need to go to church. He says, I pray on my own. The Cardinal looked at her and says, no, you don't. He was right. People say that, I pray on my own. They generally don't. Part of a communion, a community like the Catholic faith, it supports us to pray. It helps us to pray. It encourages us to pray. So it's kind of like when you exercise. You can exercise on your own, but you're not as likely to do it, not as fulfilling. And part of being a Christian is to be in communion and community. Now, it's interesting that one of the things we found with priests who leave active ministry, it's almost never something to do about the faith so much, although it can be, but they tend to be lonely, isolated, and disconnected people. Dean Hoagie found that at Catholic University in his study. I found the same thing in my studies, that people who leave the faith are disconnected. When people come to our church, we need to connect them. Small groups, large groups, social groups, faith groups, prayer groups, to connect in with the community. And we found that as I work at St. Luke Institute, that those who are isolated tend to have more problems. They tend to drink more. They tend to have internet problems. They tend to have more problems when you become isolated. That's when we have more and deeper problems. Now, interesting enough, that as the Americans throw off religion, you would say, well, they obviously becoming happier people because religion makes you unhappy. Actually, it's not the case. Happiness levels among Americans since 1972 or 73 has actually peaked and is starting to taper off. Happiness level among Americans is slowly decreasing. Or ironically, the happiness level among priests, as done in surveys the last 30 years, is going up. Happiness levels among priests are going up, and among the general population it's slightly going down. And Americans are becoming more isolated than ever before. We have lots of data connections. We're tweeting and twisting everybody, but the reality is that the number of close confidants Americans have is frighteningly low. Look at this study from the American Sociological Review. In 1985, the modal number of confidants, those you can share your personal life with, was 3. In 2004, the modal number went to 0, and the mean was 2. About 25% of Americans had no one to share and talk to. 40-some-odd percent, I think it was 40%, had one person. Americans are more isolated than ever, which is another reason why the church is even more important. Part of what it means to be in heaven, if you will, in the church, in communion, unity and communion is part of what it means to be in the Lord. Americans are becoming more isolated and less happy. This was an interesting view, by the way. We talk about this growing gulf between the church and secular society. The secular society views celibacy, I think, more and more negatively. I mean, people just think you're nuts. As a matter of fact, I was doing a workshop with a radio show, and with a husband and wife, and they were railing about celibacy, and they said how terrible it was, and how difficult it was, and finally I said, look, celibacy has its problems. You know, it's not easy. It has its joys, but it's not perfect. But I said, I've got 3 brothers who are married, and I watch how they live their lives. They work all day. They come home at night. They take care of the kids. They relate to their wives. They work at home. These guys are really working hard. As a matter of fact, I said, celibacy has its challenges, but priesthood is no piece of, or marriage is no piece of cake either. And the wife bumps her husband and goes, yeah. So, yeah, anyway. So it turns out that from this graph, as you see, the younger priests are more likely to support mandatory celibacy. So have a positive view of celibacy. The celibacy is becoming more supported by priests than in the recent past. In fact, as society sort of eschew it, I think it's kind of negative. The church priests themselves, and especially in America, are starting to support it even more. This number really should stun you. Priests in my age group, 30 to 39 years, 37.9% of priests agreed with mandatory celibacy, which is pretty low. Those recently ordained, 1 to 9 years, 81% agreed with mandatory celibacy. What that means is the support for mandatory celibacy is rocketing, really rocketing up. This is a huge change in the priests. And celibacy will probably disappear as a hot button among clergy in the next 10, 20 years if these trends continue. And in fact, when I work in the seminary, seminarians are not fighting about celibacy as they used to way back when. So, to be truly and fully Catholic, we priests and all of us must become strong men and women who are also compassionate and forgiving. We must boldly proclaim the faith, yet do so in a gentle way. And I like this phrase from Matthew. A bruised reed he will not break. A smoldering wick he will not quench. Finally, the fourth thing we need to do is to have a stronger gospel vision ourselves. See, what happens is that the secular mindset, you and I read the newspapers every day, we listen to television, we watch television, we listen to radio, whatever you do. There's a secular mindset which I think subtly creeps in, and sometimes the values of secularism are contrary to a Christian mindset. And in fact, I think it infects our minds more than we realize. More than we realize. So we need to, and I'll talk about that in a second. A gospel vision, first of all, is bold. The time for tentativeness, being timid, I think is over. We need to be bold in our faith. Cardinal Wuerl said this in his talk on secularism. He said that we need to be bold proclaimers of the faith. I think that's true. This is as in Acts 4. Then Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, answered them, leaders of the people and elders, all of you and all the people of Israel should know that it was in the name of Jesus Christ. In this name, this man stands before you healed. There is no salvation through anyone else, nor is there any other name under heaven given to the human race by which we are to be saved. Observing the boldness of Peter and John, ordinary men, they were amazed. A wonderful proclamation of good news done boldly under the inspiration of the Spirit. A wonderful role model for all of us. I have come to set the earth on fire, Jesus said, and how I wish it were already blazing. Second, the message is urgent. It is urgent. I tell you, brothers and sisters, the time is running out. From now on, let those having wives act as not having them, and those weeping as not weeping, those rejoicing as not rejoicing, those buying as not owning, and those using the world as not using it fully. For the world in its present form is passing away. There's a certain urgency to the message. It's important. The gate is wide, the road broad that leads to destruction, and those who enter through it are many. How narrow the gate and constricted the road that leads to life, and those who find it are few. The gospel vision calls for a decisive total choice between two stark alternatives. And we have names for those. We have it's the traditional names of what the choices are. And the choices are, frankly, between life and death. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Choose life, then, that you and your descendants may live. There are no abstentions. I was in the subway Washington, D.C. a few years ago, and there was a man, kind of a crazy guy, and he would have went up to the whole sign with the end is coming, Jesus. If you actually listened to this crazy guy, he actually made a lot of sense. If you actually forgot the image of this crazy man and listened to what he said, it was a perfect proclamation of the good news. The end times are coming. Believe in Jesus. Believe in the good news. It was great charisma, frankly, although presented in a somewhat disheveled way. A young woman walks up to him and he starts preaching at her, and she says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa!" She said, "That's okay for you." She said, "That's your truth, but that's not my truth." I mean, you can see someone saying that to Jesus. "Oh, whoa, yeah, that's okay for you, but I'm not into that. You can be into this Christianity thing, but I'm not into it." In the next life, the gospel vision is very clear. There's heaven and there's hell, maybe some purgation, whatever, but basically it's heaven and hell. There's no place for abstentions. Heaven, hell, abstentions. No. You end up in one or the other. And this is a gospel vision. This is not a secular vision. That in fact, there's life and there's death, and you get one or the other. And people don't like that. They say, well, it's not fair. Well, and John Paul II said it well. He said, it's not that God sends people to hell. The mystery is why people choose it, why they intentionally choose this horrible option. Find life or find death. We need to boldly proclaim it. It is urgent that we do so, and people need to choose. There is no salvation through anyone else, nor is there any other name under heaven given to the human race by which we are to be saved. Obviously, we don't believe you have to be a Catholic to be saved. But if anyone is saved, it is through the grace of Jesus Christ that they are saved. Our faith tells this directly and clearly. They may not be explicit Christians, but it is through Jesus Christ, through God's mysterious action, that they are saved, if anyone is saved. Whoever is not with me is against me. Whoever does not gather with me scatters. So the consequences of our lives are extreme and eternal. We forget this because we get lulled into a kind of secular vision. Jesus did not read the Gospels, and you'll catch the message of Jesus, that there is heaven, a place of communion, self-giving love, peace, joy, rejoices in others' goodness. Or the other extreme is narcissism, rage, isolation, hatred, and trying to destroy all the things of God. That's ultimately where our lives end up. And I think we see this. You see some happy old people who more and more are joyful, happy, loving, peaceful people. They're halfway to heaven, And then you see the other in this world. You see the narcissism in this world, the rage, the terrorism, the isolation, the hatred, destruction. That clearly comes from not choosing the Lord in their life. There's a banquet in the kingdom of heaven, the gospel vision shows us, and there's also the outer darkness, where there'll be wailing and grinding of teeth. To strengthen one's gospel vision, we need to meditate and read on the scriptures daily. And I would say that's what we need to do. You and I, in order to counteract this sort of secularism, this tsunami of secularism, we start by reading the God every day. Read the Bible, chew on the Bible, meditate. It's a different vision than what we're hearing on the streets. This is the vision of Jesus. I told you this so that you might have peace in me. In the world you will have trouble, but take courage. I have conquered the world. We should have great confidence. The victory has been won. The Holy Spirit is now sent to us by the Father and the Son, and God is with us. Take courage. I have conquered the world. And so that's where the book came from. It came from those series of kinds of meditations and my desire to share this with my brother priests, but with all of us Christians and Catholics who aspire to the kingdom and aspire to preach and teach. So that's what I had. I'm glad to take any questions or comments that people have. Linda, maybe you can help with that.
Great. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I feel like I was listening to those and taking down copious notes because they're obviously applicable not just to priests, but anyone in ministry. So now I'm going to switch over presenters. And at this point, we welcome your questions. And if you can see right here, just enter them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar panel. And we've already had a couple of those popping up throughout. And one that just popped up from Felix. He says, various variables could be contributing to the difference between the trend, parentheses, increasing for the priests but decreasing for the general populace. What can the priests do to get the others in the same level of happiness as that will demonstrate as they are really good shepherds?
Great. No, that's thanks. That's a wonderful question. I hadn't thought about that, but I do have some initial thoughts. Because in my study, Why Priests Are Happy, which Ave Maria published as well, I looked at some of the factors that went into making priests happy. And interestingly enough, the first most powerful predictor was, as I mentioned, a strong faith. So the first thing, as we help people believe, that it's not just an ethereal notion, but rather when we believe that the Holy Spirit comes into our lives. And the Spirit is a spirit of love and joy and peace. So when God dwells in us, we already are beginning to be happier, more joyful people, even when we suffer. Secondly, as I mentioned, this communion. As priests had better relationships with their brothers and sisters, that also, this connectedness made them happier people. So faith, connectedness, and living holy lives. And also, by the way, third thing was helping others. That's why I think all of you here are in some way are in helping professions. You spread the gospel. You work for the church. We help people, and that gives people joy. Typically, social science research finds that people who are helpers are happier people because it makes you happier people. So to have faith, to have friends, and to give yourselves in love to others makes you happier people. So when you ask for people to volunteer for those parish groups, you're asking them to do something that's going to make them happier.
That's true. Great. And then earlier on in the webinar, you were talking about the tsunami of secularism and all of the negative media coverage. However, one of the attendees, Michael, pointed out that he's found the media to be pretty favorably disposed to the church recently in the reporting of Pope Francis. So yes, I guess we're all curious, what do you think of that? Do you think that this might be just an anomaly, or?
No, I think that the Pope's very excited. At least I am. I'm very excited by the new Pope, and he is getting some popular. And I think he deserves it. I think he's a charismatic guy in his own way. He is, and people like the image that he's presenting. But I would say this: get your helmets ready, because when he is basically going to preach and teach what the church teaches and preaches, and some of those values, people are going to like him. So he's not going to change the fundamental, for example, moral principles of the church. So some people are going to feel betrayed. They said, we thought you were going to change all these moral things, and you're not. Mm-hmm. So I think right now they're in the little honeymoon. But let's see what happens next year.
Great.
But anyway, he's a wonderful man. I think the choice of the Holy Spirit, and I'm excited.
Yeah. Maureen just asked, how do you see the relationship between diocesan priests and religious? And I know this was something that occurred to me also when you were talking about kind of that network, because I've personally been educated and formated by Holy Cross priests at Notre Dame, and I know that was something I noticed, their community life, and I'm not sure how that relates to diocesan priests.
Well, in deference to my religious brothers, I won't say too much because I'm not a religious, but I would say one thing. And I think that you implied it, the community. One part about a diocesan priest's life is connection with the people. I mean, that's what he lives on, if you will, his faith and his connection to the people. And that's part of what gives him a lot of life. In religious priests, yes, many of them do ministry, but one of their primary sources of nourishment in life is their community. And so they work very hard at hopefully very hard at this, whether they're Franciscans or they're Benedictines or Dominicans or whatever, Holy Cross priests. So as they develop stronger communities, that really helps each one of them individually.
Anna, she asked a question. She was recently been asked to be part of a ministry for vocations in marriage, and she's curious how should she go about promoting vocation, because nowadays it looks more like we need to do things with the parents, or do we want to concentrate on the young men and women who are beginning to respond to the call?
Is she talking about vocations of priesthood and religious life or vocations of marriage?
I think kind of both. It seems like the ministry that she's a member of is...
Well, let's talk about both.
Okay.
The first one I would say about marriage, I'm not married again. I'm stepping into a place where I have no business, so I'll just say one very simple thing. But I would say that couples praying together, number one, and forgiving. I was involved when I did my doctorate in psychology. My professor, Bernie O'Brien, wonderful, holy guy, he trained me. And he did a study on why marriages survive. He looked at marriages that survive more than 20 years. And he said that the commonality among marriages that survived was that the spouses forgave each other. They knew their spouses' weaknesses, and they accepted them, and actually sometimes even loved them more because of their foibles. So forgiveness, also practicing their faith together. Now, in terms of priesthood and sisters, deacons, whatever vocation, there's lots of ways of talking about that. One of the major things I find from young men and women, or not so young men and women, is they're more likely to go into ministry full-time if they have some sort of experience of the Lord. In other words, you can teach them all this stuff, but one of the most important things we can do is help them experience God in their own lives, like Karl Rahner said, to be mystics, if you will. And one of the ways I've found that is like World Youth Day. When I have a room full of seminarians, I say, how many of you have been to World Youth Day? 2/3 of the class will raise his hand. Because in World Youth Day, and I'll say, how many of you were greatly influenced to become priests by going to World Youth Day? They all raise their hands again. The World Youth Day is an example of a dynamic spiritual experience of God in church, which really promotes vocations. So we have to teach people, but part of what teaching them is to help them experience it, to experience God, to take them on retreats, to bring them into prayer groups, to taste the Lord in their own life, and then you're on fire.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Harry asks if you have any specific resources that you found to help in developing a male spirituality for not just priests, but all men and women who serve the church.
Well, there's a little bit done. I remember Lou Camelli wrote an article on it years ago, which I liked. I forgot where it was, an article. There's some secular books on masculinity, per se, which are done, sort of the breastfeeding, tom-tom banging, masculine kind of things. You've probably seen them on TV or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I haven't seen a lot in the church. I think we're just starting to see a rise in it. You see the young priests' interest. I've heard more and more talks these days by younger priests on sort of being fathers to their congregation, to being a masculine spiritual wife. So I think there's not a lot of resources yet. I think we're just starting to see some interest. So I think you might find more articles on this rather than books yet.
Mm-hmm. Great. And it looks like that's 4 o'clock, and I know a lot of you guys also asked if the slides would be made available. So Monsignor Rossetti, is that okay if we email those out to everyone tomorrow with the video?
Yeah, you're welcome. You're very welcome. Yeah. I'd like to thank you, Melinda, and all of you for tuning in. So, by the way, you see my downstairs, and as a matter of fact, that's a papal blessing right on the wall back there. There it is.
Great.
My fireplace. Pictures of my family on the fireplace. So.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, again for your great questions and comments. Those were fantastic. And moving forward, because you guys have all listened in, we would like to offer you a 20% off coupon. And if you would like to order Letters to My Brothers, written by Msgr Rossetti, you can use the promo code webinar108 that you see on the screen, and you get 20% off of your order. However, this code expires October 16th, so use it quickly for it to work. And I hope you can all see it up on the slide right there, but just write it down. It'll also be included in the email that you get tomorrow.
And I was told by the editors that if you do bulk orders for like the diocese, all the priests of the diocese or DREs or whatever, you'll get 40% off, and some dioceses will give it for Christmas presents or whatever. So
yeah, that's true. We have that offer going on till late November, so call Ave Maria Press if you're interested in that. Thanks again to our webinar sponsors, or our partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils.
And I'd like to say especially a thanks to Beth Davis and St. Luke Institute. And Beth did so much for this presentation. Say, Beth, thank you very much. I know you're listening. And she's our guru for SLI Connect. So she's a wonderful resource for these kinds of presentations.
Yeah, and if you do want to learn more about SLI Connect or SLI or St. Luke Institute, you can visit their websites, www.sliconnect.org and www.sli.org. And if you are not already a friend of Ave Maria Press Online, please connect with us on one of the social networking sites. We're on Facebook, Twitter, we have our own YouTube channel, and Vimeo. And also, if you are a regular attendee of our webinars, I'd like to invite you to bookmark the page www.avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. All of our past webinar recordings are housed here online for you to review for free. So Msgr Rossetti's will be uploaded in a matter of days. And today's webinar recording will be posted there. These webinars are an excellent resource for teachers, catechists, and all involved in parish ministry. And just a little sneak preview, please mark your calendars for the next webinar in the Professional Development Series. On October 15th, 2013, we'll host another webinar with Anne Garrido, author of Redeeming Administration. Anne invites panelists to reassess their own daily administrative tasks with an eye toward how they might serve not only the greater reign of God, but their own personal spiritual journey. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and please join us again next Tuesday.